It's March 27th, 2003. I'm John Pleshette. We're here in the James Cagney boardroom of the Screen Actors Guild, and we're here to talk to Tom Bauer, who I first got to know actually through the union in this room, because Tom really kind of brought me into the union. We had done a play together, 30 years ago, but we were never really close until after Tom brought me in to work with the union. And I remember sitting in this boardroom for a wages and working conditions meeting next to Tom, who was sort of showing me the ropes. And Tom was taking pages and pages and pages of handwritten notes about what was going on in the meeting. And I realized what a meticulous and passionate union member he was, and how thorough. And then I did a play with him last year. I directed him in a production of The Caretaker, and I saw the same kind of passion and thoroughness that he brought to his union work into his stage work. I knew a fair amount about what Tom had done, but I looked him up on imdb.com this morning just to get an idea of his credits, and I noticed that there, even though he's only got 36 movies that are listed on his resume, that he's got 69 there on imdb.com. And he's done a lot in his 31 years as a SAG member, and also just as passionate a theater person too. I got to know him closely. We became friends in the past few years, and my wife Lynn and Ursula and we all go out to dinner and go to theater and things together. And so I've learned to know him on a social level, which has been great fun, because I've got to know that Tom's a very subtly but very snappy dresser, very hip dresser. And as Ursula complains about him, because she says that he reads so many newspapers that the house looks like a newspaper warehouse with piles and piles of back papers that Tom is determined to catch up on. But he's kind of a modest person insofar as, even though he doesn't keep his background or his personal life from you, it's not something that he volunteers. And so this is kind of an opportunity for me, as well as for you, to get to know Tom a little bit more up close and personal.
Well, thank you. I was thinking about the note-taking business. I never go back and read those notes, at least not as far as the union stuff is concerned, but I realized that as I wrote details down, I thought in greater detail. And so probably easier to commit to memory. And in doing a role in a play or a movie, I write down all of the dialogue. Not so much that I go back and, well, you take it off the script page so that your mind's eye is not looking at a script page. It becomes a blank.
So it's a memory aid.
Yeah. Right.
It's also, I think, a different way of hearing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can ruminate between words that you've written. I mean, there's a world of space and possibility between the words as you write them, which is why I think some writers continue to write in longhand.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think it's a different way of hearing. It's a different process to hear that in your head, and even to say it out loud when you write it down.
Yeah.
In terms of your own background, did you come from a family were you the only actor in the family?
Yeah, my mother played piano, and my dad was a good vocalist. He had played trumpet, and I think my mother had played around some with high school theater.
You have brothers and sisters?
Brother and sister. I'm the oldest.
But they didn't go into the theater or movies.
No. I have a friend. Well, you know him, Bobby Costanzo, who has a theory that that most actors are the eldest child. And I think there's probably a reason for that. You know, I was the only child for 5 or 6 years, so you're kind of pampered.
And the center of attention.
Center of attention, and then you're not, you know? And then you feel like you're abandoned, you know? So then I think you find other ways, you know,
Were you interested in acting early on?
yeah, even before that. And I think it was part of this childhood thing that all of a sudden I went into my own little world, you know? And I'm told by my favorite cousin that I had an unhappy childhood. Well, I must have denied it all. But I have been known to go into my own little private world. So I think it started very early on, of this imaginary world and imaginary characters.
And then you went to New York, but you didn't go as an actor. You went, why? You went to study something else?
No, in the beginning, I mean, growing up in Denver and being the son of a teamster, a truck driver, you wouldn't admit that you wanted to be an actor, no matter how passionately you wanted to be an actor. You would never admit such a thing. I mean, I kind of did write it in my yearbooks that I mean, people would write to me and say, I hope you become an actor or whatever, but I wouldn't admit that seriously. So I was going to be a journalist, and I went to New York to study at Columbia, which was the greatest school of journalism. Yeah. And I passed the admissions test and couldn't possibly afford to go to that school. I mean, that was so far out of the question.
So when you went to you dropped out of Columbia, or you couldn't really afford to go to Columbia, and then you went to the American Academy. And that was when, in the late 50s?
I stayed out a year after high school, so I think I arrived in New York in 1956. Mm-hmm. Which was really a transitional period in New York. That's when all of the television started coming out from New York to California. It just had begun. Prior to that, all the live television shows were being done in New York. It was a very exciting time to be there.
But when you were at also was a great period. A little later than that was a great period for theater. It was really the beginning.
Theater was great then because, you know, you might have 200 to 300 shows open in a year. Incredible.
And it also was the beginning of all the theater of the absurd and all those wonderful playwrights. It was a little later than that, but not much.
Well, I mean, for absurd, I mean, Zero Mostel's
The Rhinoceros?
Yeah, but
Ulysses and Night.
Ionesco was very popular then, and so it was prior to all of the La Mama kind of stuff. But yeah, it was a great time for all style of theater.
So you were at the American Academy then for a couple of years?
Yeah, I went 1 year. I was never happy with it because we were all discovering Marlon Brando and Jimmy Dean. Mm-hmm. We all wanted to be at the Actors Studio, and so I couldn't be bothered with technique, you know? I mean, I think about how much I wasted. I didn't learn how to fence. I didn't care about mime. I didn't want to know how to speak properly. Right. I wanted to mumble.
So at the time you were at the American Academy, the way things were taught was a more traditional method, sort of based on the English model?
Very much so. The director of the Academy, who died before I got there, was Charles Jallinger, who was a great, you know, all the great people, Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn and Bogart, and great actors went to the Academy during Jallinger's time. But I was there during a down period, I think, you know?
It's just sort of a transitional period,
yeah,
in a way. Were there any acting teachers? You said you had sort of a little bit of contempt for the whole system at the Academy. But are there acting teachers that you had there that you remember who you felt, you know, influenced your work?
And there were some good ones. You know, Frances Fuller, who I remember had been the girl in the red swing, was the executive director. Michael Thoma, who later he was a great stage manager. In fact, he was stage managing across the street for No Time for Sergeants. And there were people on the board of trustees like Helen Hayes. I would see her almost weekly. You know, Jackie Cooper directed me in an examination play. You know, from our gang. I mean, Jason Robards would come in and direct an examination play. So there was a lot of strength to the place, and I was putting it all down because I wanted to be at the studio.
And who were some of the other people at the Academy when you were there? I know Redford went.
Redford was there, and none of us really, we all agree he was there, but none of us knew him. He was so anonymous. He didn't even want to be an actor at that time. He really wanted to be a painter. So nobody really knew that he was there. There was some really good actors there. John Carlin, who was going by his full name, which I couldn't possibly pronounce. Gail Fisher, who later was on Mannix, and Jim Louisi, who had been a professional basketball player, then became an actor. You know, there were a lot of great people, but I think better people still came a year or two later. You know, like people we know, like Billy Devane, and
I think Cleavon Little went too, didn't he eventually?
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very popular school.
So then, how did you, when you'd been studying for a while, then how did you? What was your first job? What were the first jobs that you did in New York?
I went down to work at John Cassavetes' workshop because he had just done Edge of the City with Sidney Poitier, and he was making his own movie, his first movie, Shadows. So I had a small part in that, and they were also doing, Diane Lane's father was teaching, and they were doing an original play for Off-Broadway, and I got cast in a role for that, and the play never opened for some reason. And then I would go back home to Denver every summer, and I would work in the oldest summer stock theater in the country, Elitch Gardens. I would work as a local jobber. And then I got married.
Was this a weekly stock? Was it like a resident company?
They would do a new play every week, but they had a resident company. So it wasn't a star package, it was a resident company.
Right.
Except once Wendell Corey came in to do Our Town. That was a special thing. But Arthur Hill was part of the company, and there was Whitfield Connor was part of the resident company. So it was a good training ground, but then I got married and quit. You know, I just quit.
You quit
acting.
So after you got married, then you stopped acting, you dropped out of acting, and you went to Boston, and you're working in a security company. And this was in Boston, you were working in the security company?
Well, when I got married and had kids, I was going to continue on with acting, but I had to have a job, so I took a job where I would have irregular hours that would allow me to make the rounds. And I became a private investigator for a retail security company. And we would check stores and check employees for honesty and efficiency, and I would interrogate people. And then we also did some other kinds of jobs, like I ended up doing investigations for lawyers, and we would do homicides. I worked for F. Lee Bailey, and I worked on the Dr. Sam Shepard case and the Boston Strangler case, and we would do missing persons and insurance frauds.
And how many, so...
And I thought that was
after
acting.
you were married to Ursula?
No, that was the first marriage.
First marriage. And and you were still living in New York?
Back and forth, but by the time I took that job, I was back in New York, and then I started getting transferred to their other branches, New Haven, Boston, Cleveland.
So the family would pick up and move from city to city?
Yeah.
And how long, a period of time, how long did that go on?
I was with that company for about 5 years, and then the marriage was starting to break up, and then I went back to Denver, and then I got hired by one of the clients at the detective agency at Service, and I became the head of their security.
This was in Boston?
In Boston. It was a large conglomerate of convenience stores, and I was head of security, and most of my job was to catch thieves and interrogate them and get confessions.
Was it work? Now you were at this quite a while. Was it work that you enjoyed?
It was like acting. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I had another friend of mine, and we both thought we were just playing a role. You know,
You were playing cops.
Yeah, we were
Right.
playing cops. It was like Sam Spade or Raymond Chandler. You know, for us.
Certainly good research.
It was.
Right.
It was. Yeah.
So how did you get sucked back into acting, as it were?
After doing that kind of work for a very long time, it got seedier and seedier of dealing with other people's problems and their depravity, and it's like being a cop. Pretty soon you become more like the criminal, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just left that work, and I managed a music club, one of the great jazz clubs in the world, the Jazz Workshop in Boston, where all the great players played, Miles Davis and you name any, Duke Ellington. The whole band was on a little postage stamp stage. And
Had you always been a jazz fan?
yeah, for a very long time. And so then I started looking around for other acting work, and I did an artist in residence play at Brandeis for the American Jewish Theater. I was the only Gentile in Awake and Sing. I played Uncle Morty. And I got the bug again.
Well, you're the most Jewish Gentile I know.
Yeah, right. And then, David Proval, who we both know, I was up for some Jewish role that maybe 20 other Jews and me were auditioning for, and David said, yeah, whenever I think of Jewish, I think of you, of course. You know, a real goy from Colorado. In fact, I was having breakfast with Richard Dreyfuss at Arts Deli, and Ed Asner was there with a woman who made the Hank Greenberg story, and she idolized Richard, wanted to meet him, and he came over and said, here's your hero, Richard Dreyfuss, and the guy with the bacon's a goy. So I probably wasn't the most natural Uncle Morty that ever did Awake and Sing.
So then
then I did the basic training of Pablo Hummel with Al Pacino.
Was this at the Boston Theater?
At the Theater Company of Boston.
Theater Company of Boston.
Then I was hooked again.
The company that you were in Boston, was that a resident company?
Yeah,
Just
David Wheeler, you know, who was
Right.
one of the great theater directors, and people would come from everywhere to work with him. You know, Dustin Hoffman, Duvall, great actresses, Kim Stanley, all the great actors wanted to work with David Wheeler in the theater, and so they'd come to Boston to do
So you
plays.
then became a permanent member of that
I
company?
did some other work with them, yeah, for a brief time, and then a group of us founded a company called the Boston Repertory Theater Company, and we built our own theater, and that lasted for a while, and then it was either back to New York or try out the West Coast. So I thought it would be easier to be poor in California than to go back to New York, and it was at that time.
So that brings us up to the early 70s, and then you came out here?
When
did you meet Urs?
She worked at that company that I was the head of security for, and we met then, and it took me 3 years to ask her to dance with me at a Christmas party, and we were just good friends. And then we lived together for a while, and then we got married just before we came out here. And so
In 72?
72. We were
72.
married in 71.
Did you come out here on the fly, or did you have a job?
No, when we got married, you know, she wouldn't leave the state unless she was married. She didn't want to be found dead somewhere without having any identity in some strange place. And we didn't think it was right for her parents for us to pick up and leave without being married. Plus, we could get marriage gifts, which we would prefer be cash, you know. We made it clear that we needed cash so that we could leave town. And we lived on the north end of Boston, which was it is kind of the parish of the mafia. So some of our gifts, marriage gifts, one was a bag of slugs that we could use for vending machines, you know, cigarettes and laundry, and because we were really poor. And the first week we were here, we had our television stolen, and we were on the beach, and I stupidly left my wallet by the towel, and that was stolen, so we were like the out-of-towners.
Did you have an agent when you came out? Or did you have to find one when you got here?
Well, I knew one guy in town, Alex Rocco, who was from Boston, and he introduced me to some people, and then there was a guy, a great agent. Do you remember Peter Witt?
Sure.
Well,
was it Witt Thomas? Was that Witt Thomas?
Somebody gave me his name. I went to see him, and he was very kind to me. And he kind of looked out for me, and then I went and met, I would just pound the pavement, and I met Ron Myers, who now runs Universal.
Yeah.
And he looked out for me for a while, so at least I got a quick introduction.
As you said, you came out in '72, and then how long before you really started working as an actor professionally?
I really didn't get much work for the first 3 years, so I did a lot of theater.
And what kind of theater did you do? Was it the equivalent of off-Broadway?
Out here, mostly 99-seat, equity waiver theater, but I would do 3-4 shows a year. And I joined groups like Theater West and some other really good companies in town.
You got to work with some really interesting people, John Voight and Richard Dreyfuss, Nick Nolte.
At Theater West, Richard Dreyfuss, Theater West was great. Bo Bridges was there, Betty Garrett was there. I worked with her a lot. I worked with Mark Jenkins and Dick Yarmy.
What kind of stuff were you doing?
There was a lot of original work being done, some revivals, did a little bit of Shakespeare.
It was sort of a mix of stuff.
Yeah.
And how were the productions generated? Were they from within the company? People would want to do something, or
Theater West was always problematic in that there were 100 members and 100 votes. So you'd put up your project for examination and to be approved, and everybody wanted to vote for their own project, so nothing ever got done.
So how did anything ever get done?
Well, finally they got wise to themselves and got an artistic director who would make these decisions. But for a very long time we workshopped everything without ever doing anything. So then I started finding other theaters around town like the Met Theater, which was doing great work.
Now, the Met in those days, was that, who was running the Met? Was that when, because I remember in Mitch's interview, he was working with, who was the guy on the Waltons? So you were on the Waltons.
James Gammon and Tim Scott started the theater.
Right.
It was in 1973, and they had done a movie, Macon County Line, and decided with Max Baer, who had produced and financed the movie, they would start to do theater at the Met. A little 46-seat theater on Poinsettia near Melrose, and they did Bus Stop, and then they did a whole series of Inge plays. And here's this little 46-seat theater that started winning all of the LA Drama Critics Circle Awards up against the big theaters. And I got in for their second production, Picnic, with Nick Nolte, who was undiscovered at that time, and we did that show for 6 months.
What a wonderful part for him.
He was great, and that's where he was discovered and did Rich Man, Poor Man, and I was playing Alan Seymour to his Hal Carter. So it was a great place to break in.
You were doing a very exciting theater work.
It was.
Yeah.
I seemed to fall in.
What were some of the, if you look back on the stuff that you did during that time, give me some of the highlights, things that you know.
We did that play for so long that I got into another production at the same time. I was doing 3 plays at one time. I was doing that. I was doing Desire Under the Elms at Theater West, and then I was doing another production of Basic Training of Pablo Hummel, which John Voight produced
which
at
you had
the
done
Inner
in
City
Boston.
Cultural Center. And so by the time I finished doing Picnic, I was rehearsing the other 2 plays. I was in the first and third act of Desire Under the Elms, and I was in the second act of Basic Training of Pablo Hummel. I'd do the first act, run cross town to the Inner City Cultural Center, do the second act of Hummel, go back for the third act of Desire Under the Elms.
My, well, that's really doing repertory.
Yeah.
That's like traveling
Yeah.
repertory.
Yeah.
So, so you got to work with some really good people, with Dreyfuss
Yeah,
and
yeah.
John Voight, and all those people were doing
They were
theater
doing
at that
small
time.
theater. Richard hadn't really done that much work. You know, he'd done some kid roles, and he was just getting
So then,
going.
what was how did you get into, did you start off in television or in film?
At that time, anytime you would do a play, casting people would come, and first-string critics would review. You know, you would get reviewed, and casting people would come. So Milt Hammerman, the great Uncle Milty,
Right.
came to see everything, put me in Kojak, and Reuben Cannon, who would come to see everything, put me in Rockford Files. So those were the first
We probably were
jobs.
doing Rockford Files about the same time, right? When
Yeah.
this was in
It was
the
about the same-
mid-70s?
Yeah,
Yeah.
mid-70s. Yeah.
Well, also at that time, Universal had more hours of television than any
They
thing
must
on
have
the
had
air.
11 shows going on.
Yeah.
And Milt and Reuben cast more than a couple of those shows.
Yeah. So, do you remember? So, would you say was Rockford the first thing you did, or Kojak?
Rockford was the first thing I did. And then Kojak.
Was it one of those great guest stars that? I mean, I just remember that what was great about doing Rockford Files was that they always seemed to start with some great character and then come up with the most improbable stories that would allow these characters to exist. I once played a hitman who was going to actually a blind woman psychiatrist in the guise of an entirely different persona, so that if he ever got caught, he would be diagnosed as a schizophrenic.
Yeah.
So this was the kind of thing that you got to do on Rockford.
Well,
yeah.
that was especially true really on Kojak, because, you know, Telly Savalas thought he was so off the cuff, who loves you, baby, you know, and sucking that lollipop. And so I think they really didn't have their scripts in order. So I remember I was part of this gang of group that bombed this place, and Andrea Marcovici was in it, and then a lot of Latino characters were in it, and I have no idea why we were part of the same gang. I mean, you know, I read the script, but none of it made any sense.
Well, the Rockford scripts were meticulous, though, because that was
yeah,
Cannell.
Roy Huggins, I think, was
Cannell. It was that was Cannell.
Well, even before Roy Huggins, I think was writing them.
And those were not scripts that one changed. You know, it was
No, but you could go back, you know, and a short time later and do a completely different character, because
Yes.
I played a sheriff from Arizona in the first one, and a couple of years later I played a stockbroker.
As you said, you did that show more than once. The idea that you were an actor and the audience would like to see you do more than one thing. I came back and I did a part of this obnoxious Jewish stockbroker who was losing money, and he took a hit out on his own parents. You know, so that whole idea that you weren't just, you know, once you did a show you were done with it.
And you could do 10 or 11 episodics a year.
Yeah, I mean, that's a notion that's really changed in television. In a funny way, it seems to me it's gotten away from the idea that we're actors and that there are actors up there, and that it's fun to see actors whom you like doing more than one role.
Remember the Richard Boone Repertory Theater for television?
Oh, yeah.
Bobby Blake was one of the resident members. Richard Boone, you know, was the lead character. There were about 9 or 10 characters playing different roles every week in anthologies.
Yeah, I mean that really almost comes out of the live television tradition, where people are considered actors.
Yeah.
So, so you doing some television, and then how long before you were able kind of to really support yourself as an actor? once that took
Well,
off, did that kind
I've
of...
been really lucky in that Ursula really has the same job now, some 30 years later, that she had then, and always made...
What does she do?
She works for a law firm, and she works for the founding partners of the law firm and practically runs the law firm. And she always made it possible for me to say no. But I did have to do other things. I caddied, you know, I had a paper route, you know, I had to, but after about the third year, I was able to pretty much earn my living full-time acting.
Well, that's you know, also there were lots of movies of the week then too, and
Yeah.
miniseries, because you've got I mean, in addition to all your film work, I see that you've done, and probably this is just the most recent stuff, The Practice and Law and Order and Arliss, NYPD Blue, The West Wing, X-Files. Tell me some of the, you know, when you started getting into more long-form stuff, whether it was either miniseries or...
First movie was Bound for Glory.
Really?
Which was a great, great thing to be a part of because, you know, it was an event. We were filming in Stockton, and by the railroad tracks, every minstrel man, every musician, every folk lorist came to pay tribute to Woody Guthrie. You know, hobos.
Mm-hmm. What did you play in Bound for Glory, and who was the director?
I played some hobo on a train. There was an older hobo, a middle-aged hobo, and I was the younger hobo, you know, riding the rails. And, well, and
who was the director
there
in
was
that?
Woody Guthrie, Hal Ashby.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and Haskell Wexler as the cinematographer. So what a great first movie to be.
Yeah.
Really, the first long form that I did even before that was Incident at Vichy at the Hollywood Television Theater that Stacy Keach directed with a great cast of characters.
Which had been a play, a stage play.
Had been Arthur Miller's play.
Right.
And then there was a great production of it at KCET. So that was the first real film job. But then the first feature film was Bound for Glory. So these were great
And this
standards.
was what, in maybe the late 70s?
75, 6, thereabouts.
So even as you got into film and got more successful doing more television, you still always came back to the theater. You were very involved with the Met, and then, which I guess then became the Loretta. But prior to that, what?
At that,
give us a little...
time, a few of us, like Ed Harris, we would see each other crisscrossing between rehearsals to plays. We would do 3 to 4 plays a year at different theaters, like what's the one on Sepulveda that used to be on Bundy?
Oh, the
Odyssey.
The Odyssey.
The Odyssey, the Matrix, the Theater West, the Met. There were places you could keep going back to and probably fit in 3 to 4 equity waiver shows a year. Knowing that out of each one, you'd probably get a job.
Well, The Matrix has been ongoing for a long time. I mean, I guess it's been doing less as that permanent company because Joe Stern has been involved as he's now producing Judging Amy, so he probably doesn't have the
Well, it was
time,
Billy Devane, William Devane, and Joe to begin with.
Well, they started it with Are You Now?
2 shows before
right?
they bought the theater. I did Are You Now, Have You Ever Been, which we toured with and went to Washington with, did Ford's Theater, and then toured colleges, and then we did The Changing Room.
Just to stop you there for a second. That's a play that's all about the House Un-American Activities Committee and the Blacklist. And what was that experience like?
Phenomenal. We saw every person that it was about, every person that was depicted in the play, and everybody who was either for or against everybody who was in the play, because it was Hollywood backyard. You know, everybody was either involved, they were for or against, or had brutal feuds, you know. I mean, there are marriages made up of people who squealed and people who didn't, and it's the Hatfields and the McCoys, and everybody showed up to see the play. And it was unnerving to an extent that any given night you'd look out in the audience and you'd see a person you were playing, you know.
And who were you playing?
We all, over a course of time, played everybody, you know. Predominantly, I played Ring Lardner Jr. and Mark Lawrence, a guy who squealed and a guy who didn't.
Right.
You know, and but at various times I played Kazan, I played Arthur Miller, I played Jerome Robbins. It went on for so long that there was a joke that after a while we played the suit. You know, we'd look at the suit to remember who the character was.
Right.
You know, because we had to switch. People were coming and going. It was a tremendous production. It had great notoriety. We had a great front page Sunday New York Times review. We could have gone directly to Broadway. We got a little too cute for our britches and said, well, we'll hold out a little bit and we'll get a fatter contract here. Went to Washington, D.C., Ford's Theater, and there on any given night, you'd have people booing the witnesses and cheering the committee, you know, because it's such a cross-section of people where the North meets the South, and you're not quite sure who's who.
Yeah, I guess Are You Now, the people in Washington are more on the side of the committee than they are on the side of the actors being investigated.
It depends, you know, on any given night whether you're getting George Bush's audience or Bill Clinton's audience.
Right. So let's see. So I sort of sidetracked you here for a minute just because I was curious about this production, which it was a very exciting, a great production.
It really was.
I saw it. Actually, I grew up with a lot of those people, Ring Lardner Jr. and Tim and Ian Hunter and a whole bunch of people who've been blacklisted. So,
you know, and that thing had other ramifications. I mean, I didn't do the show at first because I was very friendly with the Parks family, Larry Parks and Betty Garrett and Andy and Garrett Parks, and they begged me not to do it out of concern for their father, who wouldn't talk about it and forbade his kids from going to see the show. They went anyway, and he didn't speak to them again, and he died from a heart attack over being so distraught about the whole thing being exposed to them. But they, on the other hand, said, for the first time, we understand why our father was as he was. You know,
well, he was
a victim, really.
He'd been cornered into testifying.
He was the first one to testify, and he didn't know how he was supposed to testify, and he was left out on a limb.
I forget, did Larry Parks come before the Hollywood 10, before people were then taking the fifth?
Yeah. Well, no, the Hollywood 10 came first, you know, and that
But it was before people claimed the fifth. That was the
right.
That was the
yes,
out.
Because the first guy to do it was Lionel Stander.
Right.
And he set the stage for everybody else, and then everybody did it. You know, Lionel Stander and Paul Robeson set that stage of refusing to talk and taking the fifth and finding out that they could do that.
Yeah, and then all those people became what were called Fifth Amendment communists, and they were blacklisted anyway.
Yeah.
So taking the fifth was tantamount to leaving the industry, being blacklisted.
Well, I mean, even our own guild abandoned our members. That we've since apologized for that, you know, mea culpa. But they were horribly betrayed and abandoned for a very long time.
Yeah, it was a terrible period. And we wonder with the Dixie Chicks being
right
because of their
well, we're back to it now.
Bush.
You know, we're back to saying, well, if you are protesting the war, why don't we just boycott your show?
Yeah, yeah. Just to sort of switch over to kind of union business in terms of your own background. You said your father was a Teamster, and so was it more natural to kind of become a union person than to become an actor?
I became a Teamster first. I worked on the truck.
You were.
You know, and then I drove a cab, so I became a Teamster.
When did you first become involved with the union? I mean, politically.
It's come and gone at different times. I first got involved in when was it? I guess the
There was a
late
strike.
70s when there was a group, an organization called CAM, Caucus for Artist Merger. The first, well, no, probably the third, fourth, fifth, 10th of many, many attempts to merge the unions. So we were very pro-merger at the time, and I was a part of Ed Asner's group that went back to an AFTRA convention in Cleveland to push for merger at that time. And Alan Williams, another good mutual friend, was there. I became so disillusioned by union politics, I didn't go back again for a decade. And then the next time I got involved was during the equity waiver wars, where our parent union were going to shut down Equity Waiver Theater, and we as artists said, we fight for the right to produce our own work so that we don't have to wait around for a fat cat to let us do a job. And we won. We overpowered the wishes of the parent union to prevail and continue to have our Equity Waiver Theater.
So after this first brush with union politics that kind of turned you off, then what brought you back in? What was the issue that got you back into the union?
The supplemental market income residual affair that happened here 10 years ago now.
Just remind us what the issue was.
Well, without anybody knowing, without membership knowing, an agreement was made without the board even being fully aware of what was going on. An agreement was made with Chet Mignon, our old executive director of SAG, who then became the head of ATA, which is the Alliance of Theatrical Agents. He became the executive director, and an agreement was made between our executives here at the Guild and the executives of ATA to give agents commissions on supplemental market income, which is by and large the sale of theatrical movies to video and cable, and accounts for a very large part of our income, our supplemental income. So it was the way in which it was done. Perhaps they deserved it, perhaps they would have been allowed to have it, except it was done without people being aware of what it was. And three guys took up a fight: Ron Sobel, Scott Wilson, and Ron Howard's dad. What's his name? Howard. I'm blanking on his first name. They took up the fight. They got me involved as the fourth man, and I got involved in that. And some of the president, Richard Masser, and Mitch Ryan, and some other friends of mine said, well, why don't you get more involved in Guild affairs? Why don't we need people to become more active? By that time, I was hearing more and being more concerned with salary compression and runaway production. The plight of the middle income, middle class actor was catching up with us all. And so I became the chairperson for the salary compression and runaway production task force.
Well, that's, I think, when I got involved with you.
Probably when we got involved, yeah.
Yeah. I know that you've been at the forefront of the whole Rule 1 enforcement and trying to have actors bring their contracts with them wherever they go. In the time since that's been passed, what do you think the impact of that has been on actors' work?
That was an outgrowth. We tend to compartmentalize things here, and I think the industry encourages us to compartmentalize. It distracts us. It sidetracks us from it's like the AMA. It keeps us from ever treating the illness holistically. We specialize, we take care of this, we take care of that, we don't take care of the whole problem. Really, Rule 1 was an outgrowth of the frustration of not being able to do anything about salary compression and runaway production. We could get a handle on Rule 1. We had a rule that said, wherever you go anywhere in the world, your contract goes with you, except it didn't, because producers, employers found a way around it with these shell companies, offshore companies, which are tax havens and other purposes for circumventing their obligation to us in our collective bargaining agreement. So we said we will take the initiative. We will preemptively declare Rule 1. And therefore, wherever we do go, our contract does go with us.
Because there were a lot of these initiatives were passed, right? Since that, what do you think the impact of that has been on actors working out of the country?
Well, it's tremendous already just in the year that it's been in effect, a little over a year, the income that we have recovered as the result of implementing it is something like $25 million, and I forget how many hundreds of jobs, contracts that have been restored to our union signatory status. And that's only the beginning, because it will get greater. Our frustration now, our problem now is that too few people are taken on these productions. So we have to get the lead actors who really greenlight the production to take more of an initiative and demand more in the way of quality in their supporting cast and more in the way of actors getting their going rate.
It seems to be the industry, I mean, we both agree the industry's gotten really horribly bifurcated. You have this uber class of stars that are making these enormous salaries, and then you have this now a kind of underclass of actor. What has been the impact of that, do you think, on the shape of the union and its effectiveness?
It's the world economy. Through the WTO and globalization, we exploit cheap labor so that fewer people can profit by the exploitation of cheaper production, cheaper manufacturing. But in this business, as it pertains to this business, we're still trying to live by a system that was designed for an entirely different method of distribution. There were 8 studios. There were 3 networks. They controlled everything. I mean, at one time, they owned the theaters and they made the popcorn. You know, they were responsible for everything from start to finish. So while they could be bastards and difficult people to work with and tyrants and so forth, they allowed us to live and to work our way up in this industry in the world, and we were allowed to be a part of its success.
It was a certain sort of paternalistic loyalty.
Now, through all of this consolidation, and because of tax havens, because of corporate veils that have been allowed to escape their obligations to the government, to the community, to everyone for the sake of profit, you now have everybody from all parts of the world investing in film, and they have decided that for the purpose of foreign sales and ancillary sales, cable, video sales, you have to have certain names in a starring role, and those stars know who they are, and they set their own price, which is the sky. And therefore, the consensus is you only have to worry about getting those 1 or 2 people, and everybody else is fungible or expendable. So, you know, the whole economy has changed in terms of how movies get financed, how they get made, and how they get sold. And the whole method of distribution it's a rip-off where you skim 30% off the top and compound interest on all the money that's spent, so that it's designed that nobody ever gets any money back, including big companies on successful movies. So what the story must be, if the actors determine how the movies get made and what gets made, they have to take care of one another. We have to take care of one another.
What do you think the impact of this kind of uber class and underclass. There is almost no middle class actors anymore. You know, we have the handful of bankable stars that you refer to, and we have all of us,
Right.
everybody else, right? I guess you know, whenever I hear these arguments that you know, some big star is making 20 million, so there's nothing left for all the supporting people, that you never hear a producer of a big movie saying to the special effects department, you know, that actor's making $20 million. We don't have any room for the tidal wave, so you better think of something else.
Right. Well, there's a myopia that prevails throughout. And one is, and it's this like get rich quick pyramid, get it now, there's no tomorrow kind of mentality going on here, that people need to start to turn around, because any actor, no matter how big they are, how successful they are, one or two really bad movies and they're not going to be in that position of strength, and they need to improve the quality of what they do now. And that all is part and parcel of having a better supporting cast. I mean, people I know well who have raised their own consciousness, like Holly Hunter, says, no, I'm not going to go back to Canada and teach people how to hit their mark and how to do dialects and how to memorize lines. I'm not going to spend my time that. I am going to demand, and I have enough clout to demand, that at least 6 members of my supporting cast are people of my choice, and they will be compensated properly. So it is a consciousness raising, and they have the ability to do this, and it's up to us to find a hook that gives us access to them. The last time around, the way we passed Rule 1 was the theatrical TV negotiation was threatening an impending strike, and people were concerned, how do I stop the strike from happening? What do I have to do? And I included Rule 1 as one of the things we need. I said, what good is a better contract if we don't have our contract with us? You know? So Kevin Spacey said, is this crucial to our negotiation? I said, yes, it is. He says, well, then let's get it passed. And that's how Rule 1, after 10 years of struggling, got passed. So that is consciousness raising. That is having access to people, finding a hook to get their attention and giving them something to do.
Let me switch to another aspect of your union work, which has been all the work you've done with the Indie Outreach Program, which goes back, what, close to 10 years now?
Well, for me, it goes back, you know, it goes back over 40 years, because my first movie was John Cassavetes' first movie.
Right.
And my first day at Sundance was Redford's first day at Sundance, the Institute.
But talk a little bit about, because the Indie Outreach Program, as from what I understand, was an attempt on the union's part to try to get independent filmmakers who were using non-union actors to start using union actors, and at the same time to work out contracts that were geared to these lower budget films, so there was a kind of quid pro quo. If you talk a little bit about the history of this. I know you go to 1 million film festivals a year, and was this how this got started, was sending you as sort of a goodwill ambassador from SAG?
You know, 30 years ago, some people like George Coe created a low-budget agreement that was sub-scale agreements, because the greater problem was that union members were doing non-union work and getting penalized for it, punished for it, caught and punished and expelled and fined and all kinds of things. And 6 years ago, 25% of movies being shown at film festivals were SAG signatory. Now 90% are SAG signatory, because we are educating people to realize that we have a contract for every budget that goes down to 0. You know, we have a budget that starts at 0, and we have 5 contracts beneath the scale, our standard scale, for a lower budget. And so these are not collectively bargained agreements. We promulgate these agreements here at the Guild. We approve all of them. We can build them any way we choose to and ask our members to go along with them, which they do. Now, our members want to do them because it's better material, better roles, things that they can write and act and direct themselves. And that's their interest and their opportunity. And it gives us a chance to redesign the way we work and how we get paid. And more, we are creating ways of our owning a piece of that movie.
I also know you've also been involved as a producer on films, which I think the first, if I'm not mistaken, was the Ballot of Gregorio Cortez. Could you talk a little bit about that?
First movie that I was ever part of on the production side, and that was the first movie to come out of the Sundance Institute. And we got stuck with a movie that we had the money to make and nowhere to show it, and so we four-walled the movie. We went out and rented theaters and sold tickets, and then we got picked up by a distributor, Embassy Pictures, and they brought us in-house so that we worked on publicity, advertising, promotion, marketing. And then when they got tired of distributing, they gave it back to us to sub-distribute. And so we learned more about distribution.
And you made some money, didn't you?
Yeah, we're in the black. And from that, we realized that we could make our own movies and distribute our own movies, and that there can be an alternative to the studio-made product.
I also know you've been involved with a new film called Below the Belt, and that this itself is part of a whole model that you have a new way to put films together financially and distribute them.
We got it in the can for $500,000. Post-production has taken us up closer to $1 million by now, and by the time we get through with everything, we'll probably have $3 million into it. But it's been progressively that we've inflated
talk about
this.
it a little bit in terms of the first of what you hope will be a series of films that are based on a different kind of production, investment, and distribution model. Because I remember just to give the people watching this a little background, there are thousands of movies that end up at film festivals that are made, and some end up at film festivals, and out of that, just a handful end up with distributors, and the rest are just, if they're lucky, they get sold a video. More than likely, they never get distributed at all.
1,700 a year at this point get made, and maybe 75 get distributed, and 5 have a real impact. So some of them shouldn't be distributed, So, but there's a real lack of distribution for some pictures that should be exhibited. So last summer, we went into partnership. We opened a studio in partnership with AT&T Digital Media, which is now owned by Comcast. We opened a studio, we made a movie, we're now in post-production, and when it's finished, we will distribute. But as important as everything else about making the movie and all of the new technology that goes with it is the business model that says everybody who was involved in the making of this movie owns a piece of every dollar from dollar one. Nobody is in a preferential cash position. Nobody gets money first, except for prints and ads. That has to be replenished so that you can do it again.
But everything else is pari passu.
There's no fee, there's no distribution fee. Investors don't get paid out first, debt, interest. Nobody gets money first. We all get money at the same time.
I also understand that one of the aspects of what you call the Denver model, this investment model, is a kind of partnership between the creators and the producers and distributors.
We're a partner.
Yeah.
We are a 25% partner. And in truth, the producer really gets the other 75% to do as they choose. But what we strongly recommend, as we did as the producer, we divvied it up 40% for 50% went to all of the creative people, actors, directors, writers, producers, composers, editors, everybody. All of us provide content. We all own copyright, all of us. And we all provide content, and we all sign it over to somebody else to do as they choose for whatever compensation we agree to get. Well, we could...
I would go back. I don't quite
Yeah.
understand. You say turn it over to somebody else to
Well,
do as they choose.
whenever we do a job, we assign all of our rights to the people who the end users, the distributors.
I mean, we the artist.
We the artist, all the people who provide content, people who write, people who direct, people who edit, people who do composition, all the production designers, all the department heads, we all provide the content that people sell. What if all of us as providers of content were partners rather than employees? Why not? We provide the content. You want to buy the content? We provide it. We're your partner. Now we'll decide what each of us will get. And we could divide it differently every case. It doesn't have to be a blanket situation. You can divide it differently every time, as long as everybody gets a proper proportion at the same time.
What, in terms of a kind of synergy between this kind of business model and the union, are there contracts that the union could design that
Yes,
would serve this sort of
we could do
business
it all.
model?
We could do anything we chose. Rightfully speaking, Len Chasman, who was here for a very long time, said, look, we never wanted to put our members at risk. So in a sense, we're doing that. If we say you get paid according to the revenue generated. Yes and no. I mean, we're working for less anyway. And some producers take it upon themselves to give us ownership. There's a new company, Indigent, Independent Digital Entertainment. They made Tadpole, they made Personal Velocity, now they've made Pieces of April. They give everybody 50% from $1. They keep 50%, and all the people that made the movie get 50%. So when they make a movie for $500,000 and sell it for $5 million, as they did Tadpole, all of those people got divided 50%. They based it on screen time or days worked or whatever. But I know the makeup woman got enough money from that to make a down payment on a house. So it is, we could do this. We could promulgate this in all of our contracts, but can we enforce it? I say yes. I say we could have enough manpower here to spend more for enforcement and collect money, to generate more money, as opposed to trying to save money, cut down costs, cut down service, spend more to make more.
Well, certainly there's an enormous amount of personnel that's involved in policing residuals and things like that. So
there is.
And also because of, I would think, because of the digital revolution and markers and all these things that you can now put on product to monitor them electronically, that the actual job of policing this is probably less complex than it used to be.
Should be.
I mean, it should take not less complex, but wouldn't take quite as much manpower.
Should be, but yet we still don't have electronic timekeeping for when we sign in and sign out. Why not? We should have. We should have monitoring for commercials, but we don't. It'll come someday, I guess, but when and why not?
We've been talking about the union stuff. We've sort of gotten away from your career, and you've got quite an impressive list of credits here. So I thought you might share with us some of the experiences you've had on some of the films like Pollock. It was like to work with Ed, and as in contrast to working with Oliver Stone on Nixon, or Ulu Grossbart as a real kind of theater director, or Renee Harlan on Die Hard. They're all very different experiences. What was that like?
There's a story for everyone, and it's interesting in that Pollock took 10 years for Ed Harris to put together. So all of us who had been involved with him with the theater company that we're still a part of wanted to contribute in any way we could. So the minute he asked any of us to do it, we said absolutely. So, you know, you'll see Val Kilmer briefly as de Kooning, and so I was happy to play the role of Dan Miller, who had befriended Pollock and extended credit to him when he couldn't even buy groceries, and ended up being paid for a grocery bill, the real Dan Miller, for a $65 grocery bill. He got a painting that he later sold for $7,000. And I think the last time that painting was sold, it was sold for $4 million or something like this.
Die Hard started off very differently and then ended up as something else for you?
Die Hard 2, when we started, was smaller than Pollock because it was only Bruce Willis, the director, and a couple of producers and a small camera crew in a two-character.
Yeah, because you're in the bowels of, weren't you in the bowels of the airport?
Then there was a drop in a pickup. When I came back, it looked like World War III, you know?
Right.
It had grown to that, but it started off for me as a very small personal movie, you know? And then Oliver Stone is a trip unto himself in that, you know, I first met him when I was doing basic training of Pablo Hummel with Al Pacino, and they were trying to get Born on the 4th of July done way back then. But Oliver Stone makes it almost impossible for you to pass his acid test. He will find any way in the world to insult you in the most humiliating ways. And most people will walk out, and if you don't, and he hires you, then he nurtures you like a baby chick.
So the humiliation takes place at the audition?
Audition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then when he decides to hire you, he couldn't be a better mother hen. And his entire crew anticipates his every need, and they're 2 steps ahead of him, and everything is first class. When I was told I was going to Riverside to do my scenes and I would be staying at the Mission Inn, I didn't know about the Mission Inn. I thought it was like worse than Motel 6. Mission Inn, it sounded bad. Well, I found out, you know, it's one of the great hotels in the world. And that's where he put us up, all of us. So
and what creatively, you know, in terms of a wonderful collaboration between actor and director, what have been some of the exciting, some of the highlights?
Well, a guy like Ed, who's a great actor, he'll employ a technique that I know John Cassavetes used to use with Jenna Rollins. And while the camera was rolling, he would be asking her personal questions and making personal comments, but she couldn't work outside of the text itself. She would have to answer with the text. And Ed did that a lot as we shot, you know. He would...
Because you had very little dialogue, I remember. It was so much a kind of reactive part. Pollock's this kind of obsessive
that
and
scene, but
drunk
there were other scenes where there was more dialogue. And so, you know, he would do a lot of talking while the camera was rolling. I like it because
while the camera was on you, it was your shot.
It's good because it takes the onus off of acting. You know, Brando used to not allow directors to say action, you know, or don't get ready to work. You know, don't stop and start. Most of the best work is done in rehearsal, and then you say action, and everybody stiffens up, and they start acting up a storm.
More often, your best work is on the other person's close-up, right?
So if you just keep it rolling and let things develop and happen, you almost forget the camera's on you. So that was great. Rennie Harlan, that was an interesting thing because Bruce Willis and Joel Silver were directing, and Rennie Harlan was just there, you know. I mean, he really knew more about filmmaking than either of the two of them, but he had to put up with them. So, you know, with Harrison Ford, he and Phil Noyce on Clear and Present Danger, they worked out Harrison won't take the responsibility of directing, but he directs everything. He makes every decision, about everything. He just won't put his name up there, and he won't take the responsibility for being called the director, but he's directing. Well, I remember doing Clear and Present Danger, and I started doing this around with the helicopter. He said, now you're telling the story, because I was indicating where the buttons were and everything. Mm-hmm. So now you're telling the story, But
who was saying this? Bruce?
Harrison
Ford.
And Phil Noyce was about to have the plug pulled on him down in Mexico because he was over schedule and over budget. So he got 5 cameras going at one time, and he was on a monitor, and he was going to get in as much footage as he could before they pulled the plug, And he's a great director, but, it's just people, strong-willed people that do things the way they want to do it.
I mean, do you think that's often, on big movies, do you think this is what often happens, is that the star is driving the train?
Can be a lot, and then other actors like myself just want to be the hired hand and do as they're told. And when I produce, but when I act, I want to follow direction.
Have you ever wanted to direct?
Yeah, I started to work on something with Angelina Jolie before she became famous, and Maureen Byrne, Laurie Driscoll's wife, doing a wonderful John Ford Noonan play that we started filming the rehearsal and decided we'll make a film like Vanya on 42nd Street. Mm-hmm. Let's make a movie about doing a play, So I felt I had a handle on that, and I could go back and do that someday.
Talk a little bit about, because it's sort of an interesting story, that the development from the production of The Caretaker to what evolved into Below the Belt.
Yeah. Well, of course, you did a wonderful job of holding Caretaker together and bringing the whole design of it to something really beautiful, and we kept extending the run. We were only going to run for 4 weeks, and we ended up running 12 weeks, and after 5, 6 weeks, 7 weeks of rehearsal and 12 weeks of performance, we were in pretty good shape. And so my partners in production and the distribution company came to see the show, and I had known about this property of theirs that they've had for a very long time, which was budgeted for $10 million in a great script, and they could never raise the money and get the talent together at the same time. And they came to see the play, which is a 3-character play, and their screenplay is pretty much a 3-character screenplay with a lot of extras. And they said, why don't we just do it with these guys? And why don't we just shoot it on video? And why don't we rehearse it like a play? And these guys are perfect for the characters. And by the time we closed that play, we were in rehearsal for that movie, that other movie. And we just continued on knowing everything we knew about one another with different characters and different screenplay, and continued on for another few months and did the movie.
Would you say that the work that you did as an ensemble with Zander and Bobby Knott and The Caretaker put you ahead when you got to Below the Belt?
Way ahead, which really proves the point that, we were trying to prove with our theater company that if you invested that kind of time, and even the money to buy rehearsal time, like Darren Aronofsky did a very smart thing with Requiem for a Dream. How would he get actress?
Ellen Burstyn.
Ellen Burstyn, and the other two, Jennifer Connelly. How would he get them for 8 weeks of rehearsal and 6 weeks of shooting, other than he just said, I'll buy these people for the run of the movie contract on Schedule F, and we'll buy rehearsal time, which is the best investment you can make. Before the cameras start rolling, Sidney Lumet he knew this, it's the cheapest commodity there is, rehearsal time. And you can afford to buy the run of the movie contract with your principal actors and buy as much rehearsal time as you want so that you'll be better prepared when you start shooting.
Well, certainly, it's almost so many film experiences. Actors are expected to arrive on the set with everything there, whereas in the theater, so much of what's there is a journey that starts on the first day of rehearsal, and which you explore as an ensemble, working with other actors.
So you get what you pay for, and
Yeah.
you get what you've invested. If you see the Berliner Ensemble doing the Arturo Ui, and you see that kind of precision theater, money can't even buy that. You know, that's just time. That's Moscow Art Theater doing 12 plays for a period of 2 years each until they're ready to be done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as my friend said, they're so vested with humanity that they transcend critical judgment, and they do. They go so far beyond what's on the text, in the text.
Well, it's like those Simon McBurney productions, you know, the Théâtre de Complicité. It's these same sort of evolved productions that with a small group of committed people.
See, that would be the best purpose for having a theater space, to be able to take all commercial imperatives out of the equation and just invest the time to do the work. And when it's ready, it's ready. You don't even have to have an opening night, per se. And when it's time to make this a film, you make it as a film.
If you would envision a kind of ideal creative life for yourself, what would that be? Would that be a model for it?
Yeah, and I felt we almost got there at the Met Theater, because the criterion, first and foremost, is the space. People come, they go, they come back because they have a space. They have a playpen, they have a sandbox to come back to, they have a home to come back to. You go off, you do a job, you come back. You interrupt the work, you go work on something else, you come back and you work some more until it's time. And my idea would be to have a space, design the space, have the theater, do the work in the way that the Moscow Art Theater did over a period of time. I would guarantee that out of 10 plays, 3 would go to a commercial theater and 2 or 3 would become movies, like Driving Miss Daisy, you know, a little play, a little movie that made hundreds of millions of dollars. And not every play is intended to become a movie, or shouldn't be, but so many would be.
Well, I guess the business, particularly out here, is so completely bifurcated. I mean, there's almost no relationship between theater and film, except insofar as a continuity of the actors who may work together in theater and then go on to work together in film.
They think they get it. They come and they see a great theatrical production. This has happened many times. Disney then invites us to come have a meeting to see how we can work together. And you tell them something like this, and they, yeah, right. So we were going to do this live cable theater. We were going to do live theater for cable TV. We'd do a run like the ER that was like all live television used to be done. Mm-hmm. Then you could go back and tape for posterity, you know? So we were going to sell this whole package to some cable company. They were interested, but in the end, they really wanted the sizzle and not the steak. They wanted Angelina Jolie and John Voight to do Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. They didn't want Ed Harris doing Night of the Iguana or Jessica Lange doing a play she wanted to do. You know, there's just lack of foresight or vision of what wonderful work could be done.
Well, it also is, you know, to go back to another subject, I mean, in the old studio days, you had these vertical monopolies, but at least they were interested in what they had the monopoly for, which was making movies. Now, you have several huge industrial conglomerates that own studios or networks as part of a portfolio, and basically they're interested in performance.
Stockholders, satisfying stockholders and CEOs. I went to a town hall meeting that was moderated by Mike Medavoy, who's been a studio chief and producer for a very long time, and a couple of other guys that run studios, and Peter Bart, and the guy who runs The Hollywood Reporter, and Jeff Gilmore, who's from Sundance, and who's the key critic for the LA Times now.
Kenny Turan?
Yeah, and Ariana Huffington, and Mike Medavoy and other guys of his ilk saying, you know what, we can't make these choices anymore. We can't make artistic choices. We are 6% of the overall conglomerate, the empire. We barely make a dent in their profit and loss line. We have to answer to too many stockholders and too many CEOs and too many board members, and all we can do are sequels and franchise kind of pictures. The only hope for a future will be in what you, Jeff Gilmore, and others can create at places like Sundance. And Redford on Charlie Rose said, it's over for me until I find a way to finance my own production and distribution, which people wanted me to do 20 years ago, and I didn't want to do that because I thought there was a conflict of interest. Now I must do it because there's no other avenue for doing the independent.
So, despite the situation in the business in general of these huge studio movies, it seems to me the life of the business now is still independent films, where all of the energy, the real creative energy in the business is going into making movies of all different budgets and sizes. And hopefully that'll continue because, as you said before, for actors, there are now so few really interesting roles. I mean, I went, the first time I met Tommy Lee Jones, I was understudying him in Ulysses in Nighttown on Broadway. And, he's a Harvard-educated, bright, interesting intellectual guy. And then a couple of nights ago, I saw him running all over Portland, chasing Benicio del Toro, and this is what's happened to so many actors. They don't have anything interesting to do anymore.
Well, people come to us partly because of my association with the theater company that includes Ed Harris, Holly Hunter, Amy Madigan, Beth Henley, partly because of a movie we did independently out of Sundance, The Ballot of Gregorio Cortez, partly because of the SAG Indie Outreach program, partly because of a lot of things. I get great scripts that are brought to us by actors who are writing, they want to direct, they want to produce, they want to do roles that they haven't been doing. And I saw in the SAG newsletter where our program director, Paul Bales, said, tired of doing roles that don't satisfy you, want to make your own movie, call the SAG Signatory Workshop, learn about how to make your own movie. So we've got to solve the distribution problem, and there will be many ways of doing this. We'll be able to distribute by satellite. We'll be able to have movies on demand by pushing a button. We'll be able to have cinema coffee shops like Starbucks, where you can read books and drink coffee and see movies. And this was Mike Figgis's idea, that you have branded cinematic centers. There will be many more ways of getting a movie out to an audience that is interested in having it. Right now, we're trying, it costs as much for Y Tu Mama Tambien to advertise as it does for Spider-Man. So you've got to find alternative ways of letting your audience know you're there, because there is an audience that wants
Well, I
to
guess
see
that's
it.
why it's so hard, is why it's so hard for independent films to try to compete for space. I mean, for actual theaters, is the distribution costs have gotten so astronomical that the distribution costs on the movie or for the independent films are often more than the film cost to make.
Quite a bit. I mean, it doesn't matter how little the movie cost you. To do an American art film, specialized film like Good Girl, like Memento, like Y Tu Mama, like Big Fat Greek Wedding, all different movies, but aiming at the same audience and getting varying degrees of success in return, they all have to spend the same amount of money, $4 to $15 million, to platform the release of film. And doesn't matter that the movie might have only cost $75,000, you know?
So, are you optimistic?
Yeah, very. Because we will, there is an opportunity for us to manage a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day a satellite transponder cable channel. You know, nobody owns the sky. And the satellite will enable us to do such a thing as that. Now, it's also a very good time for theater access, because in this construction of new wonderful stadium theaters, there's a lot of theaters out there that haven't yet been converted to supermarkets or carpet stores. There's still movie houses. Some of them are on college campuses and could be used beautifully for specialized film. And so there's an opportunity to do a lot of things or to create new venues, like Figus's idea of a Starbucks type branded cinema center.
Well, also, I would think also with the kind of conversion, I mean, the coming together of fairly elaborate home theater systems and the computer, as that technology is merging more and more, there may be a future in terms of what people simply want to watch at home.
There's that. You know, I'm still romantically inclined to say kids even still need to get out of the house. You know, you got to have some place to take a date, you know. So, and that water cooler syndrome that everybody needs to see things at the same time so that they can talk about it, and just the joy of sharing, you know, the electricity that happens when you see a great movie or see a great play.
So if you look back at 30 years of acting in this business, what's the worst job you ever had to do? I don't mean the worst product. What was the worst experience? I mean, I know you were pretty miserable doing the coal miner thing.
I would say that probably matches anything I ever had to do. You know, on the one hand, it was a great thing to do, and that the coal miners themselves were pleased to have themselves depicted as well as they were. It was very limited because you're trapped in a cave in a coal mine and being about to be overtaken with water, and there's not a lot you can do dramatically other than say, let me get the hell out of here. And that's kind of how the job was too for 5 weeks. You know, we're up to our ears in water and cold and
you definitely looked miserable.
We didn't have to act
Didn't
at
have
all.
to act at all.
No acting required. That was about as bad. You know, I'm watching the sandstorms in Iraq, and I made a movie, The Winds of Kitty Hawk, that we did at Pismo Beach, and we got caught in some sandstorms up there that were just, I can imagine how horrible it must be for these guys.
Yeah, that's a big, wide beach.
Yeah.
Big, long, wide beach. Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty miserable. On Die Hard, it was ridiculous. They should have gone to Finland and made the movie there, but instead they kept picking these places where the snow would keep melting, so it was a never-ending search for snow. We kept moving from one location, chartering planes and moving crews all over the country.
Was it shot here or in Canada?
All over the damn place. We shot it, no, it was shot here, it was shot in Denver, it was shot in the state of Washington, it was shot, we finally ended up in Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and 25 below zero wind chill, at night, and barely being able to get in a shot between having to get back to the heater. That was fairly miserable.
So I know, going back to your union activities, other than the Indie Outreach Program and the Rule 1, I know that you've been involved in two other current issues. One is the merger, which is now called Consolidation, and the other is the ATA, the whole problem with the agents. And I know from your emails that you're sort of two minds about this. I'm still skeptical, but more inclined to favor it or not?
No, I would be in favor of a merger of actors. More and more, look, we need to decide what we want to be. Do we want to be a social welfare program and say, we must take care of those who can't take care of themselves? Is that what a union is for? Then if that's what it's for, then okay, let's just concentrate on that. But while I hated the whole idea of a trickle-down system of Reagan's, I think it kind of works now in this economy of movie making and acting, that the people at the top, if they take care of themselves, they can take care of other people somewhere beneath them. And so we can never concentrate on taking care of a few, namely working actors. We always have to take care of the whole, which is namely non-working actors and other categories not even related to acting.
Do you think the union's gotten too diversified?
Yes, and we've been reduced to our lowest common denominator by the industry at large. I have casting agents like Simon Ayer and his wife, Beth, who say, don't you guys know that we look upon all of you as extras? Now, if you're not the star, you are your background, practically. You're all scale, and if possible, less than scale. That's how we look at you.
Well, certainly
Don't
it's
you
created,
look at yourself that way?
Certainly also, I guess, in terms of union business, that the agendas now are so enormously diversified that it's very hard to concentrate the energy of the union when you get to negotiations each time on a few central issues, because the concern of the background people are different from the concern of the working actors. They're not it's not that one is more legitimate than the other.
No.
They're just not the same thing.
And their business takes up about 1/3 of the negotiation time. Now, more problematic than that is all of our contracts are not coterminous, so we can't even honor the strike of a soap opera actor if we are obligated to our own contract as an episodic series actor. We have to cross one another's picket lines. Now we're going to add more categories to that who do not honor one another's
You mean announcers
job actions,
and
announcers. Yeah. And I have a big problem of being in the same union as a critic who is going to downgrade my work in critical judgment, and we're going to be in the same union together.
Do you think the solution is to create an actors union?
I think we're in the business
which is sort of what
business.
Is that what British Equity
no,
is, really?
I think union is in the business of business. I think we become a union, like a lot of unions, that are in the business of collecting initiation fees and dues without attending to the needs of its members. I think it's about getting bigger, expanding, more members, more dues, more initiation fees, not being able to take care of the needs of a few. In 1946, the actors broke away from the extras and whoever else was in the union at that time and said, we have to go our separate way now. Now, AGMA, what does it stand for? The American Guild of Musicians. Mm-hmm. But it's the opera symphonic musicians, right? There's 5,000 members in the union. There's 800 members in the board, and they have meetings twice a month. Now, not everybody attends every meeting. They attend when they can, but Equity tried to take them over several years ago. They fought for their own sovereignty, their own exclusivity, their own speciality. And look what just happened on Broadway, how effective they were able to be in shutting down Broadway because they could control their own job action. I think we need that. So if we're going to talk about a merger, I think it would be, they talk about having a war between jurisdictions of AFTRA, and so it'd be the shortest war in history. It'd be like the shortest communications media strike in history was in Italy. It lasted 19 seconds because everybody honored it. This would be the shortest war in history. All actors over here, everybody else, go as you please, one union or the other. That's my opinion.
And the other area that you've been very involved, you're involved with currently, is still this whole problem of the agents, the ATA negotiations. What's your position?
Something that most people don't know is there's a guy named Mitch Canner, and he got together with Roland Perkins and Jeff Berg and some people, and they said a few years ago, they said, the old way of generating advertising revenue is not working anymore. We're going to change the way we generate revenue from advertising. We're going to do it, and sure enough, 2 days ago, there's a new company called Integrated Entertainment Partners. They are going to program product. You know, it's not even product placement. They'll make product a part of the story. Business is going one way, and I hope I'm going a different way. Now, the agents are now going to become partners of the advertising companies, and we're going to be our agents' employees? Never. If anybody's going to hold copyright and provide content, we are going to be a partner. Does my agent want to be my partner or somebody else's partner? I don't even care. He can't represent me. That's one thing for sure, but I'm not going to be anything less than a partner if he's a partner.
To be devil's advocate here, the agents defend themselves by saying that the managers have taken over the business and that they're not regulated.
Right, and they're right. So let's now divide the provision, the people who provide content, the people who provide money, the people who provide services. Let's now construct that partnership. Let him be a partner to whomever. Let him do whatever he wants, produce or whatever. If he produces, he can't represent me, he can't fight for me, he can't negotiate or litigate for me. He can be in a part of the partnership, but I've got to be in it too. I can't just be an employee. We've got to change the business model. The old one is broken anyway. You know, everything shows the gap gets wider between the haves and the have-nothings, you know, which is a big part of our world problem now. Tom Friedman's thing last night was about the poverty of dignity, you know. You can be humiliated so long you can live vicariously through somebody else's life that you can't be a part of, but it's the only life you have, somebody else's, you know, and it's not yours, and you don't have anything to live it with. All you have is humiliation. We need a new system.
And what is that system?
The one we have with the Denver model, for one, and we're not the only ones that have it. Indigent have it because it's good business. You know, it's good for the investor. You defer a lot of upfront costs because you don't have a lot of people clamoring to get their money first. Get it out. It's a pyramid system now. Get it quick while you can get it. And the guy at the bottom, there won't be anything left, you know? It's like a merry-go-round. You try to get in the middle so you don't get thrown off. What about everybody having a proper part of the partnership? You'll get more for your money, you'll get better quality, better integrity, less dissension.
So what you're really suggesting is that there's a real, for you personally, there's a kind of convergence here
Yeah.
between the way the product is made, the way films are made, and the way the business should be.
The reason for making them, even, we're asked backwards now where we say, well, let's make the deal, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do with the deal. Well, how about this is a great script, and who are the best people to be in it? And let's make sure everybody is compensated fairly, and everybody provides the best of who they are and what they can do.
Right.
That would be a novel concept, wouldn't it?
So you're doing what you want to do. That must be a nice feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of just a continuum, really. I mean, it's what John Cassavetes wanted 50 years ago, and that's why we do little theater for no money, or anything we do because we want to do it.
Yeah, I guess just to stay in touch with yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess you and I have a sort of similar situation in terms of our livelihood and our wives, because even though there have been times when we're making a lot more money than our wives, that our wives have, because they both have jobs, have supplied a kind of financial continuity which allows us a certain independence. And what's your advice to somebody who's trying to sort of balance their creative needs and what they would like to do with what they often have to do?
Two people come to mind. Elisha Cook Jr. bought a hot dog stand when he came here and never gave it up. As successful as he got, he kept the hot dog stand. And Fred Daniels, who's taught at the Strasberg Institute, teaches people about, he can do construction, he can build houses, he can build cabinets. And of course we know Harrison Ford did, and was going to quit acting because he wasn't going to do anything less than the roles he wanted to do, so he would be a cabinet maker. And Fred Daniels taught his students the art of making a living outside of acting so that you could act for love and do something else for making money. Now, a lot of us don't have a choice of the kind of acting work we do. I mean, sometimes fate takes us into doing soaps or commercials or being great feature film actors or being models or, whatever. And sometimes we don't have that choice, but sometimes we do. And if we making choices we hate because we don't have any other way of earning a living, I think that's a tragedy. I mean, I was lucky and I am lucky, as you are, to have a wife who earns a living, and she'd love to get out of her job someday. But it's afforded me the selfishness to say, no, I won't do that. And it's paid off better now in my older age, that the work I do seems to be of a kind of a quality that people respect, I have a lot of friends who are better actors than I, who are out of the business because they kept falling further and further beneath and between the cracks with bad stuff because they had to make a living. So, that will differ for different people how they do that. But I think when you're starting off, if you can figure out how to earn a living.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know whether it's true for you, but I think of my life as an actor in New York for 10 years before I came out here. I balance it off against the 30 years I've spent out here as an actor. I'd probably say the New York time was the best. Yeah. Because so much of it was doing what you wanted to do without an enormous pressure, economic pressure either, because you at that time you could live on the East Coast for relatively little money and still be taking classes and still be doing off-Broadway.
And
talk a little bit about the whole commercial pressure. You get to a certain level out here, and it's so important to maintain that level.
If you acquire too much of an obligation, John Patrick Shanley, would not move out of his hovel. He didn't want to take on a greater cost of living because that would affect the kind of work he did. And I think we have to be really vigilant about that you don't start acquiring financial obligations that you then have to live up to. I know great actors that have stopped doing theater. They can't afford to do theater. That's a tragedy to me, that a great stage actor can't afford to do a play.
Yeah, I guess there are two aspects of people who become enormously successful saying that they can't go back to doing theater because they can't afford it. And I just wonder whether that also is that they can't afford it emotionally either. It's too much of a risk to expose themselves in that way.
That's a big part of it, and that's another story. But when it's for economic reasons, because you have burdened yourself with those economic with that nut that has to be paid every month just because you had to have a bigger house, a bigger car, or more of everything, then it does affect your work.
Yeah. And I mean, I think some people are able to kind of realize that and refresh themselves or pull back from it. I mean, I remember years ago Richard Chamberlain going and doing Hamlet, I think someplace in some repertory company in England. He just did that because he'd always wanted to play that part.
A lot of guys have been able to afford themselves the chance to do that again because they needed to make a lot of money to be able to have that luxury, like Ralph Waite did the Waltons for 9-10 years, and then he went into politics, and he's been doing theater. And Mitch Ryan, who did all the great roles in the American theater, the great leading roles, never made a tremendous amount of money until very recently, when he had 5 years on a series. Now he can go back to doing anything he wants to do. So, maybe you can afford yourself the chance to do things that you didn't do for a while. But to take on obligations that bury you in such a way that you have no choice.
I think one of the ironies of working out here as an actor is that the one way to become successful is to get on a series. And unfortunately, series work, it's very secure, but it's also, from a creative standpoint, very limiting, very stultifying, because you play the same part, different scripts, but you basically are playing the same part week after week after week, year after year after year. And if you're in a successful series, you can become enormously wealthy off of that, but your range gets narrower and narrower and narrower, and your faith in what you can do.
It is the most excruciating thing I could think of having to do for a long period of time, doing a series for a long period of time. But if I used it to buy that great theater and to do all those great things, or to cash out at the end of my career and be able to enjoy other kinds of creativity, then I guess I could put up with that,
Personally, I don't see your career ending.
No,
Certainly not within your own lifetime.
And I'll probably never have a series, I don't seem to be the person that they want to be on a series every week. I've done two.
Maybe that's just as well.
I think it is.
Well, these 2 hours went by quickly.
Yeah, has it been that long?
Yeah, I guess it has been that long. But thank you so much for sharing your life with us. And I think it's such a inspiration both for actors who are just actors and actors who are passionate union people.
Well, thank you for letting me learn so much about myself by asking so many insightful questions.
Well, thank you for sharing yourself with us.